So we were talking about the situation between the Soviet Union and the United States and the containment policy and how the United States sought to stop the influence of the Soviet Union from spreading. We also mentioned that Germany was divided up into East and West of Germany, and within that there was a bit of a problem. You see right here, remember this little map shows you the four zones that were distinctly divided up, and the city of Berlin was entirely within the Soviet sector, even though it was partitioned just like the country as a whole. So Eastern Berlin was under communist influence, and Western Berlin was under free and democratic control of West Germany. You have a crisis that develops, though, in 1948 to see just how much the United States wants to contain communism from spreading. Joseph Stalin all of a sudden decides to blockade the western portion of Berlin. He sees himself as putting the United States and the Allies in a tight spot. They're not going to allow supplies to come into Western Berlin. And the idea was if we cut it off from the Allies getting supplies to the people of West Berlin, they will have to give us this half of the city, or the people will starve to death. And so the United States, in particular, who's leading the Allies in this particular charge, they try to figure out, what are we going to do? And here are the options that Harry Truman has, or at least what he thinks he has. Initially, they could give the city over to the communists, but that was a bad idea because then you'd be going against the whole concept of the Truman Doctrine and the containment policy. So that's a no-go. You also have the possibility that they could run the blockades, that they could take trucks or trains and try to force supplies in there. But of course, that could provoke a war, so you don't want to do that either. So Truman and his people come up with an idea that they would make air supply drops, that they would fly planes into Western Berlin, and they would do so in such a way that they could resupply Western Berlin, but at the same time not break the blockade that Stalin had ordered to be set up. And so what happens over about a year and a couple of months time frames, you had planes lining up like this, continuously taking off and landing from the western portion of Germany, going into West Berlin, resupplying the people, and then immediately turning around and leaving. And it takes quite a bit of doing to get this down pat, but the United States at the time becomes very adept at organizing and efficiently packing the planes, getting the timing right, and the planes working together to supply Western Berlin with what they needed. At some points, too, certain things that can make airdrops just out of a plane in general. Supply runs could be done like that. So in some instances, you don't even have to land. But after more than a year, Joseph Stalin finally realizes that he can't do anything about these airdrops without risking war himself. If he shoots a plane out of the sky, that would be seen as an act of aggression and an act of war, and so Stalin finally gives up and releases the blockade. The United States looks like the winner in the grand scheme of things because Stalin, number one, had to back down, and people also saw him as kind of a jerk because he was trying to starve to death the western half of Berlin. So the Berlin crisis, even though this really tests America and Britain and France to an extent, it's a test that they pass. And so Western Berlin is saved from communist aggression, and the containment policy is being seen as working. Now, after the Berlin crisis, you also get the United States organizing a treaty alliance, something that we hear a lot about today, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This is an alliance between the United States, Canada, and Western Europe. These countries find this as another useful way to deter communist aggression. If you go to war with one of them, you're going to war with all of them. And so that way, the Soviet Union would be hopefully deterred from making any acts of aggression against these nations, the member nations. It originally starts out with less than a dozen nations, but they've since expanded NATO. And of course, that's one of the things that's causing conflict in the Ukraine today. Russia claims they don't want them joining NATO. Right? You also have another little situation that develops in China. The Chinese Civil War is going on, and of course, we know how this is going to go. There are two camps, two leaders fighting for power in China at this time. Mao Zedong is a communist leader who's getting support from the Soviet Union. Mao, that's his family name, his last name, so when we say that, that's who we're referring to. Mao has the support of the Soviet Union, and he's also supported by the peasants. Mao, like a lot of communists, like Vladimir Lenin did, promised land reform to the peasants and said specifically that these poor peasants would get their own piece of land that they could work and develop. Mao Zedong also had the benefit of having dedicated communist followers. During his time fighting the Civil War here, the people who were with the communists were committed to the cause. And that's going to be a big deal, and here's why. Opposing Mao is Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek is a leader of a group called the Nationalists. Sometimes they're called by their Chinese name, the Kuomintang. And Chiang Kai-shek, even though he's supported by the United States, he's not promising the same land to peasants. And at the same time, some of the people in his organization are very corrupt. And so Mao Zedong is going to, and his communist army are going to be able to overwhelm Chiang Kai-shek during the Chinese Civil War, even though Chiang has the support of the United States in terms of people who give them military training, money, weapons. But despite that, the communists under the leadership of Mao Zedong are going to take control of China. Now, not only do the communists take control of China, but Chiang Kai-shek and his people flee to the neighboring island of Taiwan. And that is where Taiwan has been in existence ever since. It's been a touchy spot with the Chinese ever since 1949 and the end of the Chinese Civil War. The Chinese would like to have Taiwan back, but the United States has made it a point to say that is a red line, and crossing that red line would mean conflict with the United States. So Mao Zedong and his followers are going to win the Chinese Civil War, and you can see right here that for a while they were fighting this war during World War II, and the Japanese had moved in and taken control of pieces of China. We talked about Manchuria, the rape of Nanking, things like that. But after World War II is over, the Chinese communists and the nationalists go back to fighting one another. One of the other things that really causes the nationalists to lose is the fact that during World War II, they suffered heavier casualties than the communists at the hands of the Japanese. Now, in the bigger picture, China has become communist, and this is alarming for the United States because all of a sudden now we didn't contain communism. We failed. And so people see that as a problem, that we need to become a little bit tougher in trying to contain communism. The United States doesn't have to wait long for its next test because the following year you're going to see the advent of what we call the Korean War. And we'll get to that in our next video.